It's a real guy. He decided for his birthday to tightrope across the Niagara Falls. That was his birthday present to himself. And when he announced this, crowds flocked to come and see him do this. And so the great Blondini climbed up and he walked across the tightrope across Niagara Falls, and everyone cheered as he went from one end to the other. And so when he had finished, he said, "Do you believe I can do this again, but with the wheelbarrow?" And all the crowd shouted, "Yes, we believe, we believe." So he grabbed a wheelbarrow, put it on the tightrope, and he tightroped across Niagara Falls with a wheelbarrow. And they cheered as he got to the other end. And he said, "Do you believe I can do this again with someone in the wheelbarrow?" And they all shouted, "Yes, we believe. The great Blondini can do it. Yes, we believe." And he turned to the crowd and he said, "And who will be that person?" And they all went quiet. See, it's easy to believe when you're not the one who's walking the tightrope. It's easy to believe when you're not the one who's going to get into the wheelbarrow. It's easy to shout from the crowds, "We believe, we believe." And this morning, in this series that we're doing called Believe, it's easy for us as Christians to shout from the sidelines, "Lord, we believe you can do all things. You can do anything. We believe, we believe." And then God says, "How much do you believe? Will you get in the wheelbarrow and trust me? Will you step out and trust me? Will you be a part of what I'm doing and trust me?" I wonder this morning, it's not the great Blondini who's calling us to trust him, but God Almighty. Are we willing to trust him to carry us and keep us and sustain us and use us for his glory this morning? I love that story. I love the fact his name is called Blondini. But what a challenge to us this morning. As we continue in this series of faith, and for the pursuit of faith, I want to ask the question this morning, what does it mean to live a life of faith? Because we use that kind of terminology and language in church all the time. Are you living by faith? Are you living a life of faith? Are you believing God for great things? If you've been in church any amount of time, you will have heard those phrases said to you. And sometimes we don't always define what that means or what that looks like. Or sometimes we'll see what other people think that means and what that looks like, and it's not always accurate. If you watch the prosperity preachers, they'll tell you it's all about materialism. If you live by faith, you can have what I've got. You can have the money and the material things and the nice house and the nice car. That's not faith, folks. I can show you people who have no faith who've got all of that. I can show you billionaires who don't even believe in God who've got all of that. And so if we talk about this thing, I think it's important for us to define what does it mean to live a life of faith? Because without faith, it's impossible to please God. But with faith, all things are possible. So turn with me to Hebrews chapter 11. We went there once a couple of weeks ago, and we looked at verses 1 and 2, and we saw a definition of faith. It's a confidence and an assurance. It's a confidence of things hoped for and assurance of things not seen. And so we saw that's what faith is, that we believe in a God we cannot see, and we believe that we go into heaven even though we cannot see that either. We believe in promises that we've not yet received, but by faith it makes it real to us, because faith is the substance that brings future promises and makes them present reality. Faith is the hand that reaches out and grabs those promises and pulls them into the present and says they are real. Even though you don't know and understand them, you can't experience them yet, they are there waiting for you. God has prepared a place for you. No eye has seen, no ear has heard what God has prepared for those that love him. Oh, it's exciting, folks. It's going to be great. I can't imagine heaven. I can't understand it. And to my human mind and my human understanding, it seems ridiculous. It seems crazy. But faith says it's real. Faith gives me the eyes of my heart to be able to see what is beyond my ability to see with the natural. And so we saw that's the definition of faith. But I want to jump back into Hebrews 11, because it not only gives us a definition, but it gives us an examples of faith. And so verses 13 to 16, it says this, Hebrews 11 verses 13 to 16. It says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. That's the key verse. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they'd been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had an opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. I love the verse where it says, God is not ashamed to be called their God. I think oftentimes we're ashamed to be called Christians. We're ashamed sometimes to tell people that we go to church. But God is not ashamed to be called our God. When we're a people of faith who step out in faith, God is not embarrassed of us. He's not ashamed of us. In the Old Testament, he was so pleased with the life of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he aligned himself with them. That when he introduced himself as the God Almighty, the Creator, Elohim, he said, I am the God of Abraham, I am the God of Isaac, and I am the God of Jacob. He wasn't ashamed of them because of their faith and because of their confidence in him this morning. But verse 13 says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. What a fantastic testimony to have. That even with their last breath, they still believed and trusted in God. They still believed in the promises of God. Even though they hadn't received them, it says they only saw them from a distance. They didn't receive them. They didn't obtain them right there and then. It was something for future generations. But God had promised it to them. But they saw it from a distance. They knew that the Messiah, Jesus, was coming. But they never saw him. But they still believed. And they died believing. And this morning, that's the kind of life I want to live. That with my last breath, when I'm lying on my deathbed, when that time comes, we sing about it, don't we? Bless the Lord, O my soul. When that time, when the end draws near and my time has come, can we still sing his praises? Can we still worship him? Can we leave this life and go into eternity with that confidence and trust in God, still believing that he is faithful, that he is good? That's the kind of life we want to live. Well, the writer of Hebrews, and we don't know who the writer is, but he's writing to Jewish believers, Hebrews, and he's talking about some of the great Old Testament saints who they would have known very well because that was their life and their culture, that was their heritage and their lineage. So they would have known all about these characters. And so when you read Hebrews 11, you get a snapshot of these people's lives. You don't get an in-depth commentary, just a snapshot, because the writer of Hebrews is assuming they know who he's talking about, which they would have. So to me, it's almost like the Facebook or Twitter of the New Testament. It's a snapshot. If he was around today, the writer of Hebrews, these would be his tweets about faith. So he's giving you all these different characters. And I'd love to look at them all this morning, but we haven't got time. And you want to go home for dinner, and I want you to come back next Sunday as well. So we're not going to look at them all. And each and every one of them can be a sermon in themselves. And we did, a few years ago, me and Ken did a series on them. When we talked about champions of faith. And we looked at different individuals. But this morning I'm only going to pull out 3. And we're going to look at what does it mean to live by faith this morning. And the first thing I want to say is this. Simply to live by faith means your conviction is stronger than your emotion. Your conviction is stronger than emotion. What do I mean by that? Well, verse 7, it talks about a guy called Noah. Anybody know who Noah is? Yeah? Anyone seen the film they made about him, which was dreadful and nothing like the Bible version? It was horrendous. But anyway, so don't watch that and get your theology and your history from that, all right? Because it was a dreadful film. But everybody knows about Noah and the flood. You've been taught about it in Sunday school and in kids' club. And we've talked much about him. But I don't think we really stop and realize how much faith this guy had. Verse 7 says, by faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Now we read that and say, yeah, of course, that's what Noah did. He built an ark. We all know about the ark. We know about the animals coming in 2 by 2 and the unclean ones coming in 7 by 7. We all know how it worked. And we know about Mrs. Noah. And we never know her name, but she's called Mrs. Noah. We all know this kind of story and what went on. But do we realize and stop and consider this guy Noah and the context that God called and spoke to him in? Because God came to him one day and said, Noah, I want you to build a boat, an ark. This was a floating box. It wasn't the boats that we see today because it wasn't a sail, it was just a float. It had no rudder, it didn't have any way of sailing or being maneuvered. It was just meant to float. So it was just a floating box. And he says to him, Noah, I want you to build an ark. Now Noah was a farmer, he wasn't a carpenter. This wasn't his trade. He wasn't involved in this industry. But yet God called him. And this project was going to require more than just him. He would never have completed this on his own. He would have needed help and support. But what we have to understand about this is why I say his conviction has to be stronger than his emotion is because, number one, Noah lived nowhere near the sea. So it's almost ridiculous to have a yacht in your back garden when you're landlocked. Can you imagine that? It's like me and Kambach having a yacht out the back. And everyone's saying, that's a nice yacht. What are you going to do with it? I don't know. I'm nowhere near the sea, but it looks good, doesn't it? Can you imagine me starting to build a boat? It just looks ridiculous. Noah lived in the wilderness. He lived in the desert. And so one day he started to build this boat, and I can imagine the neighbours coming out and saying to him, what are you doing, Noah? Noah, you're building a shed? Putting down some decking? Look nice outside the house. What are you doing? Putting an extension? And he goes, no, I'm building a boat. I'm like, sorry? A boat? Yeah, I've decided to build a boat. God has told me. Okay. But we know we're near the sea. I know, but the sea is going to come to us. Really? What's going to happen, Noah? Well, God has told me that rain's going to fall. Sorry, you said what's going to fall? Rain. What's rain? Because up until this point, there was no rain. It says a canopy or a mist surrounded the whole earth and watered the land. And so it was a very tropical environment. And so there was no rain, just a mist that came and watered the land. And so he said, yeah, God has told me it's going to rain. I don't know what rain is. And he said it's going to fall from the sky. And it's going to come in such deluge and such a torrent that it's going to flood the whole earth. And so at this point, you can imagine his neighbours going to the children, come on kids, let's leave Noah to his little project. Stay away from strange Noah. Don't go playing around by his house anymore. I think he's having a little bit of a midlife crisis or a breakdown. And so they can imagine pushing away and starting to distance themselves. And every day he started to build this boat. And you can imagine the neighbours going, there's crazy old Noah. He's still building his boat. And the problem is, it was not only in the desert. It was not only building for something called rain that they had never seen, but it wasn't going to come for 120 years. This was a long-term project. This was a long-term investment. So every single day and every single year that passed, I can imagine neighbours saying, you still building, Noah? Yeah. Still believing the flood's going to come, Noah? Still believing there's going to be this rain that you're talking about, Noah? Still going? And can you imagine after 40, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, 80 years? I can imagine if I was Noah, surely there was some part of him that said, is this really going to happen? Did I really hear from God 80 years ago? Did I really hear from God in my youth, and now I'm getting an old man? I'm still building this boat. I've been ridiculed and mocked for 50, 60, 70 years. My neighbours don't bother me. They don't come to my barbecues anymore. My kids won't play with their kids anymore. I'm called crazy old Noah. 100 years passed. Can you imagine, put it into real life, how long and how hard that must have been for him? And you know what? I've come to this conclusion. But it says Noah obeyed God. And he built the ark. And he was by faith a man who walked with God and found favour in the eyes of God. This was a righteous man. And I thought to myself, what keeps such a man to do something as amazing as that? To build such an ark and to be faithful for 120 years, even though he was probably mocked and derided and there was kind of this ridicule and scorn. What would keep him? And it's simply his conviction was stronger than his emotion. When people laughed and when people scoffed and when people mocked and sneered and said all sorts of things, when he looked ridiculous building a boat in the desert, and for 120 years, he knew that he had been divinely warned. God had spoken to him. That's what the verse says. He was divinely warned. This wasn't his idea. This was what God was speaking to him. And that's what we have to hold on to in life. That whether it takes 1 year or 10 years or 100 years, when we are serving the purposes of God, when we are living for God and stepping out for God, we have to remember that God has spoken. We have to remember what he has spoken over our lives, what he has said to us maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. What was that promise that he gave you? What did he say to you? Because your emotions will cause you to want to quit. I'm sure there were days when Noah said, I'm tired of this ark building project. If I see one more plank of wood, it'll be too soon. If I have to knock one more nail in, if I have to, and can you imagine when God said to him, but you're going to take all the animals with you as well, two by two, they're going to go on the ark, and he's thinking, how on earth am I going to do that? How am I going to get these animals to begin with, and the creepy crawly things? Where am I going to get them from? And how am I going to get them on the ark? How is this all going to work? This seemed an impossible task, but it says God brought them to the boat. And after 120 years, the ark was finished. The animals started coming because of God leading them divinely to the ark, and they got on board, and then the rain started. His conviction was stronger than his emotion. Nobody was mocking him in the 120th year. When that rain started to fall and Noah was on that ark, nobody was sneering at him. Nobody was calling him crazy Noah anymore. But to be able to get to that point, we have to have an unshakable conviction in the things of God. And so this morning, I want to encourage you that when you are serving God, when you're believing for God to do great things, when God speaks to your life, people will misunderstand you. People will think you're crazy. People will mock and maybe sneer at the things you are doing, because faith seems ridiculous to so many. Faith seems crazy to so many who don't understand where you're coming from and what you've heard. They haven't heard what you have heard. They haven't been spoken to the way you've been spoken to. They haven't heard the voice of God and been divinely warned. And so for others, they're on the outside looking in. There are times, even as a pastor in church life, there are times where I wanted to just give up and quit. I'll be honest with you. There are times where I thought, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Where life has become difficult and challenges with circumstances and situations, especially when I was working 2 jobs and I was bivocational. There were times where I just thought, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm running on fumes. Surely I have to do one or the other. I can't do both jobs. And there were times where I just wanted to give up and wanted to give in. But you know what kept me? My conviction was stronger than my emotion. I went back and said, what am I doing this for? Has God called me? Yes. Is this God's purpose for my life? Yes. Then I can't quit. I can't stop. Because it's not a job, it's a vocation. It's a calling. If it was a job, I would have given up and found another one. But you have to come back and say, no. This is much more than that. This is what God has for my life. This is his purpose. And so I keep going. And I keep believing and trusting. Secondly, we have to be able to step out into the unknown. That's a scary thing. When God calls you and speaks to your life, he requires faith because he doesn't always tell you how it's all going to work out. If any of you have ever done anything for God and stepped out for God, you will know that God doesn't give you a map. Sometimes all he does is give you a compass and point you in the right direction. And when we come to the life of Abraham, it says this, in verse 8, it says, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance, he went out not knowing where he was going. And so again, we have to take this to a real life context. And Abraham has been called by God to leave his home country, all his relatives, all his family, and to go to a place that he didn't really know, and to dwell there for many, many years as a foreigner and as a stranger, until one day, generations later, 400 years later, his nation, his people would inherit that land. Now at this time he wasn't a father, he couldn't have children, his wife couldn't have children, they were very old, everything was stacked against them, but God had spoken again, a promise. You will become a father of many nations, I'm going to give you a land that's your own. But I'm not going to tell you how it's all going to work out, I'm not going to tell you step by step, I just want you to trust me. And so he stepped out into the unknown. And I wonder this morning, do we have that kind of faith? Because living by faith requires that. Living by faith requires that. Because if God tells you all the details, you don't need faith. If God tells you how everything's going to work and how he's going to provide and how he's going to meet your needs and how the purposes are going to be worked out and how he's going to solve your problem, you don't really need faith. But to step out and not know, to step out with uncertainty into unfamiliar territory and to just, all you've got is God. That's hard, isn't it? Let's be honest, that's difficult, that's challenging, because it goes against the natural, it goes against who we are, and especially if you're the type of person that likes to have a list, know the details, have a plan. Anybody like that? I'm looking at my wife. My wife has got to have a plan. She likes a list. She likes to know. And my daughter is becoming the same. Every morning, me and my daughter have the same conversation. Dad, what are we doing today? When I take her to bed, sometimes she goes, Dad, what are we doing tonight? I said, you're going to bed. That's what you're doing. You're not doing anything else other than going to sleep. But she's exactly the same. Dad, what am I doing today? 6 o'clock in the morning. I don't know. Coffee for in 5 minutes. That's all. And breakfast. That's about as far as I've got. But she likes a plan. And I think sometimes with God, we're like, God, what are we doing today? God, how's this going to work? God, I'll do that if you show me how it's going to work out. If you show me how it's going to come together. If you show me that you'll provide for me. And you'll make a way. And it's all going to be okay. And God says, I'm not going to do that. Because I need you to trust me. Step by step. I need you to trust me. See, the psalmist said that a good man's steps, Psalm 37, the good man's steps are ordered by the Lord. And so each step is ordered by God, but it's one step at a time. It's like the headlights on your car. When you turn the headlights on in the dark, they don't show you 3 miles down the road. I don't know how far in front of you they shine, Alan. Is it about 4 foot, 5 foot? I don't know what the distance is. They only show you so many feet in front of you. And you just have to trust that you're not going to hit anything 3 miles down the road, because they keep showing you the next bit as you turn a bend and as you go further. But they don't show you the whole road. They just show you enough to see where you're going. And I think with God, it's sometimes like that. He shows you enough for the next stage, for the next chapter of your life, for the next step. But he doesn't show you the whole journey. God knows, because he knows the beginning from the end, but he doesn't reveal that to us. And the thing we have to understand is this, that when we step out into the unknown, other people will struggle with that. They will find that difficult, like with Noah. And again with Abraham, can you imagine him telling his family, I'm leaving, I'm packing up. This was a guy who was wealthy, who had been very blessed. He had a lot of cattle, he had a lot of things. And he decided to leave his own country. He was a moon worshipper, that's what they worshipped there, so he was in a pagan religion. And God, the living God, called him out of all of that religion, from Ur of the Chaldees, and asked him to leave. And I can imagine his family saying, well, why on earth would you leave? You're prospering here, you're being blessed here, all your family here, your friends here, your neighbours here. Why on earth would you step out and leave this place of comfort and fulfillment and blessing? And all he had again was, God has called me. Where's he called you to? Is it a better place? Is it a nicer place? I don't know. I don't know where I'm going. Can you imagine having that conversation? And going backpacking for a year. Oh, great, where are you going? I don't know. I'm just going to go. It's madness to so many people. But God has called you. And can I just say this morning, a couple of things, is this. Don't let the size of other people's faith define your goals and your dreams. Don't let other people's doubts define your destiny. Because what people will say to you is, oh, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. I've got a friend who decided to work with the poor and help the poor. God had put this on his heart. And another person said, oh, you don't want to do that. That won't get you anywhere. You don't want to do that. Can you imagine saying that? I want to help the poor. I don't want to do that. That won't get you anywhere. People don't understand. People said to me in my working life, and they say, do you actually give 10% to the church? Yeah, oh, you don't want to do that. Someone said, you need to reevaluate your life, Dale. That's what they said to me. Think it through. Because to them, the church is just ripping me off. You're just conning me into giving. You need to reevaluate your life. Their doubts, their fears, their thoughts. You know, you can allow that to come in and then define your destiny and define what you do. So many people are a reflection of other people's opinions. They live their lives as a reflection of other people's opinions. No, I don't do that because someone said I was silly. I don't dress that way because somebody said I didn't look good in that. I don't go there. I won't go to the gym because someone said they laughed at me because I was a little bit unfit and overweight. I don't do that because I'm worried about what other people will think of me. We live our lives so confined. Who cares? Don't let other people's doubts and fears and anxieties define what you can do for God. I'm sure there were many who tried to talk Abraham out of leaving, and they give him good reasons to stay. But it says Abraham obeyed God when he called him to leave his own country. He stepped out into the unknown, and he trusted God in unfamiliar territory. Exciting, but scary. Because we all like to know what's going to happen. None of us like change, and none of us like the unknown. But faith requires it. Number 3, very briefly, if we're going to live a life of faith, we have to do that which seems ridiculous to see the miraculous, or to experience the miraculous. If you notice with all of these characters, and if you go through them all in the book of Hebrews, you will notice something that's so common right through their stories. Although they were from different backgrounds, they're from different times, they had different stories, and they had different lives of faith, the one common thread right through them, or there's more than one, but one of the things you will find is that their willingness to do that which is ridiculous to see the miraculous. In verse 30, it says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled 7 times. That's a ridiculous statement from a human perspective. They encircled the walls of Jericho. We all know the story of Joshua in the book of Joshua in chapter 6, where they walked around the walls once for 6 days, and then on the 7th day God says, walk around 7 times, and when you shout, the walls will fall down. Yeah, of course they will. That's how it happens, isn't it? That's how life works, isn't it? It's as simple as that. But when God is in it, it is as simple as that. But can you imagine the 6 days of walking around and walking around and walking around, nothing happening? The people who were living in Jericho, the Canaanites, looking over saying, what on earth are they doing? They're not trying to scale the walls. They're not trying to build ladders. They're not trying to get in. They're not trying to chip away at the walls. They haven't got no catapults. They're just walking round in circles, round in circles. They must have thought to themselves, this is great. We'll just let them wear themselves out and die. They'll kill themselves doing that. Because how many of you said, I feel like I'm just going round in circles? Haven't we say that in life? I just feel like sometimes we're going round in circles because it's God's leading and God's guidance. He takes us around in circles. And I've shared with you before that sometimes when we go around in circles in leadership life and in church life, because people say to me, why are you changing this? Why are you changing that? And then a few years later, why are you changing this again? Why are you changing that? We just seem to be going around in circles. And we are. But what we're doing is spiraling upwards. So we're going around in circles, but we're not staying in the same place. I can't remember what the word is called for the thing that spirals upwards. I wrote it down. What is it? Vortex, is it? Is that the word? And it's like a spring, like a coil, you know? And so from the human viewpoint, it looks like you're going around in circles. But if you actually look at it from God's perspective, you're spiraling upwards. And so sometimes life feels like you're going around in circles, but you're not. And for the Israelites, for the Jews who were circling Jericho every day for 6 days, it looked like they were just going round in circles, repeating the same old thing every day. But every day they were getting closer and closer and closer to the promise of God. They were getting closer and closer to breakthrough. They were getting closer and closer to entering the promised land that God had promised to Abraham 400 years ago. And now 400 years later, his not his ancestors, his descendants, that's the other word, his descendants were now going to enter every single day. And then on the seventh day, Joshua said, right, this morning we're going to do it 7 times. And I want you to shout. When the priests blow their trumpets, I want you to shout. And God is going to give us this city. And I'm sure there were some who stood there and said, yeah, right. Yeah, this is. Have you seen these walls? The walls of Jericho were so thick that chariots could ride around on the top of them. That's how thick these walls were. This wasn't a brick wall in your back garden that you can hit down with a sledgehammer. This was a formidable city. And God said, with a shout, I'll bring the walls down. And so they did it. And seventh day, they walked around, and on the 7th time they shouted. It says, and the walls came down, and the people went in and they took the city. That's God. That's the supernatural. That's the miraculous. But are we willing to do that which is ridiculous or seems ridiculous? Because what I've noticed all through the Bible is people of faith who see great things were willing to look stupid, were willing to look foolish because they had heard from God. They didn't decide to do these things, but God had called them. When we think of David and Goliath, David, a teenager going out to fight a giant who was a seasoned warrior and veteran. Who would do that? Who would do that? Who would send a teenager to go and kill bin Laden? Or some other dictator? Who would do that? If I said that, you'd say that's crazy. Send someone more qualified. Not someone who just turned up with some sandwiches for his brothers. And then you turn around and say, well, what are you sending him with? Oh, just a sling and some stones. Okay, this is a suicide mission. It's ridiculous, isn't it? And then we step into other people, like Peter when he walks on water in the midst of a storm. Nobody gets out of a boat when there's a storm. Everyone stays in the boat. But Peter gets out. He does the ridiculous. But what does he do? He experiences the miraculous. Because he's willing to do what no one else does. When a guy came to Jesus and he was blind, Jesus took mud off the ground and rubbed it in his eyes. He spat in it. That's disgusting, isn't it? He spat in it and then he rubbed it in his eyes and then he says, now go and wash in the pool of Siloam. The poor man was not only blind, he had mud in his face, and now you've got to go and find this pool to wash in. Can you imagine what he looked like walking through the town? And people saying, well, what's happened to you? Well, I went to see this guy Jesus who heals people, and he rubbed mud in my eyes and spat on me, and now he's going to tell me to wash. And when I do, apparently I'm going to see again. See, from a human, all of these things are ridiculous. But it's how God works and weaves his plans and his purposes. And it says when he washed, his sight was restored and he saw. I think the reason we don't see so many miracles today, or we don't see God move today, is because we're afraid of looking silly to others. We're afraid of what other people will think of us. We're afraid that we'll be ridiculed and mocked, and we may be. But if we are willing to do that which seems ridiculous, I believe within that contains the miraculous. That God can work his plans and his purposes out. If you're not afraid of what other people will think or what other people will say, but you will commit your ways to God and you will step out and say, you know what, I trust God. And not on a whim, and not on just your own thinking or your own desires, but because God has spoken. God had called each and every one of these. Someone said a good idea may come to pass, a God idea must come to pass. And so these people were obedient because God had spoken to them. And what is God saying to you? And you may think it's crazy. I guarantee you, if it sounds crazy, it usually is God. If it sounds ridiculous, if it sounds something that is madness that you wouldn't never do, it probably is God. That he wants you to step out and trust him to do great things. Now, when I read this list in Hebrews 11, if you're like me, you feel a little bit intimidated. As I read through Abraham and Noah and Enoch and Elijah and Rahab and all of these great men and women of God who lived throughout generations, throughout 4,000 years of history, I'm a little bit intimidated by them, and I think, yeah, that's great that they lived a life of faith, but they are not like me, and I'm not like them. These are the heroes of the faith. These are the champions of the faith. But what we have to remember is that we read Hebrews 11 in light of Hebrews 12. And I just shut my Bible, and I shouldn't have. In light of Hebrews 12. And in Hebrews 12, give me a minute to turn back to it, it says this. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Who is this crowd of witnesses that we're surrounded by? It's everyone in Hebrews 11. So the writer of Hebrews is saying in Hebrews 12, in light of all that I've just spoken about, of Abraham, Enoch, Rahab, Elijah, Abraham, all of these guys, in light of this, he says, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race set before us. So what he's saying is, don't be intimidated by these guys. I haven't written about their lives to intimidate you. I've written about their lives to inspire you. Because one other common thread they have is not only do they have great faith and great obedience, but they failed. They failed. Each and every one of these people were sinners. Abraham lied on 2 occasions about his wife. Noah got drunk, and his son took advantage of him. Who's the other guy just thought? Joshua. We don't know much about Joshua, but I guarantee you that he sinned. We don't have anything saying that he made a mistake, but we know that the ephod that they created, they started to worship as a nation, and they made an idol out of this ephod. Every one of them were human beings who made major mistakes and sinned and failed. And so they're not superheroes, they're not supermen, they're not people who are beyond our reach. The writer of Hebrews says, I've wrote about them simply because they were ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and they are there to inspire us to live that kind of life. They lived by faith, and you can do the same this morning. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Therefore, let us live the same life. But he says this, he says, but not look into them. He says we are to fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. See, the men and women in Hebrews 11 are there to inspire us. So we look to them for inspiration, but we look to God for impartation. He imparts the strength, he imparts the ability, he imparts to us everything we need to sustain us and to keep us. So he says, fix your eyes on Jesus. Don't fix your eyes on them, just be inspired and encouraged by them, but fix your eyes on Jesus, because he's the one who's going to keep you and sustain you this morning. And so I want to finish with this. To live a life of faith, we have to be willing to do that which seems ridiculous, to see the miraculous. We have to step out into the unknown and be willing to live with uncertainties. That's just the way it is. And what was the first one? And we have to, what did I say about the first one? We have to build for future generations, and your conviction has to be stronger than your emotion. Yeah, I shut my notes and then I can't remember my own notes. Your conviction has to be stronger than your emotion. And so we have to be willing to do that. We have to be Noahs and Abrahams and Joshuas in our day and generation. That's what it looks like to live a life of faith. It's not being blessed all the time. It's not being prospering all the time. It's not everything going right all the time. Actually, we're going to come back to Hebrews 11 at some point in this series again and actually see that it can be the very extreme of that what these people endured because they had faith. And so if life isn't going right for you right now, if life isn't always good for you right now, that's okay. Because it doesn't mean that God doesn't love you, doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It could just mean that God requires some sort of faith for you in that situation. He's testing it, he's growing it, he's stretching it. And so faith isn't everything being okay all the time and life being spot on. And to be a man or a woman of faith doesn't mean you have to be perfect, just obedient and just respond to what God is saying to you this morning. Let's just pray, and Stacey's going to come and lead us in another song.